Okay, so welcome to our December meeting, Midnight Sun Flycasters. Just going to go through some brief announcements here before we hand things over to Fred to go through our presentation for tonight. So if you're not familiar with the club, I think everybody on here is. The Midnight Sun Flycasters are Interior Alaska's fly fishing club established in 1976. The goals of the club are to share knowledge and fly fishing skills and build kind of a fly fishing community in Interior Alaska here, as well as promote fly fishing and fish conservation. And if you're not even checked out our social media channels, they're there. We also have a Google Sites webpage. Definitely give that a look. And some of our main events are usually the kids camp, which because of COVID hasn't happened or didn't happen last year. And I'm not quite certain what might shake out with that this year, but that's one of our main events where kids go for a couple-day camp with their guardian and learn how to fly fish and learn fly tying, fish ID, all these great things. We also do periodic casting clinics. Fred, who's our speaker tonight, is a certified casting instructor, so he often does a casting clinic in the spring. And then we had one of our club members, Alex Garnier, do a great spay casting clinic this fall. So those sort of events that the club does are just great ways for like-minded people to get together and learn new skills. And that's what the club's all about. So going through just a few announcements here for our January meeting. We're going to probably keep it virtual, but it'll be January 12th at 6:30 p.m. via Zoom. And we're not quite sure who we're going to have for a presenter yet. I've talked with Andy Griska, who's a fish biologist with the Alaska Department of Fish and Game, about maybe doing a talk about Chattanooga whitefish and broad whitefish and Minto Flats. So we'll see. We might get him on board for that, but stay tuned and we'll let you know when that happens. We sent out the poll to the members about whether people wanted to continue to do virtual meetings going into the new year or whether we might start doing some in-person meetings. And it was pretty split. So there was about a third of folks that wanted to stay virtual, a third that wanted to do in person, and then another third that didn't really care. And so I think, with the new COVID variant coming out and with, keeping in mind that we don't want to exclude the people that only want to virtually, I guess, participate. I think we'll just continue virtual meetings, at least for the next couple, and then just kind of see how things evolve after that. That's kind of what we gathered from that poll. Like I mentioned, the kids camp and banquet that we usually run, we're a little bit unsure if those are going to happen just because of COVID and the limitations on the energy and time of the officers, but we'll definitely keep you up to date if anything changes. Good news, we revamped our online membership option. Typically you have to download a form, fill it out, and then mail it in to re-up your $25 MSFC membership. Well, you're gonna be able to do that online if you'd like, just in time to, if you know somebody that you could give a Christmas gift to that might enjoy a membership if they like to fly fish and they're in the area. That's a good way to do it, and it makes it real easy with this online option, or if you want to renew your own membership for 2022. And there's a link there that goes to where you can do this, and I'll show you right now. Let me share. So if you go, here's our Facebook page. Hopefully everybody can see that. So if you're on our Facebook page, you can see this blue button here, shop on website. You can click on that and go to a place where you can get that online membership, or you can click on the link in the about section of the Facebook page and then go to the shop up here, and then make whatever selection you want. So that makes it nice and easy. I think we get more members that way, more people re-upping their memberships. It does take some time to mail in the old form and whatnot. So that's about it for our announcements. This time of year it's kind of quiet, but just one more thing. So I got to go on the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Fish of the Week podcast the other week and talk about lake chubs, which are these small, kind of unappreciated forage fish that we have in lakes and rivers around interior Alaska. And you can actually catch them on the fly or catch them through the ice. So talk a little bit about that in the podcast. And if you have any interest in that, check it out. Just Google U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Fish of the Week. And they have a whole bunch of other great podcasts for different fish like burbot, Chinook salmon, chum salmon. Most of it's Alaska featured, but they also have a few topics like Devil's Hole pupfish down in Nevada that they talk about. So I would highly recommend that podcast. Checking it out if you get a chance. Right, so that's about it for announcements. We'll move on. I'm going to introduce today's presenter, Fred DeCicco. And Fred's a longtime MSFC member. He worked as a fish biologist with the Alaska Department of Fish and Game from the 1970s until he retired in 2006. And in that job, he researched and managed Dolly Varden, Arctic grayling, whitefish, and other sport and subsistence fish, mostly out in Northwest Alaska. And more recently, Fred's been involved with Twin Peaks Adventures in Nome, and he guides there, and that offers helicopter access, fishing for trophy grayling, Dolly Varden, salmon, and pike. And he's also, as I mentioned, a certified fly casting instructor through the International Federation of Fly Fishers. So Fred's fished around the world, including in New Zealand, Australia, Mexico, Argentina, and Christmas Island, among other places. And he's got a lot of knowledge on destination fly fishing trips, and he'll be talking a little bit about that tonight. His knowledge and skills are a huge asset to this club. He's always been a great contributor to the club, and I always enjoy listening to him talk. And I have to admit, I was a little bit selfish in asking Fred to talk about this because my wife and I are doing a trip down to Argentina in February, so I wanted to get some info on the fishing down there. But I think you guys will really enjoy this too. This time of year when we're kind of stuck, frozen in our cabins, it's great to hear about some warm Southern Hemisphere fishing opportunities. So with that, I'll go ahead and hand things over to Fred. We're going to kind of switch over the screens here, and we'll get him going. And then we will share slides.
Okay.
Hopefully everybody can see that.
Cool. All right. Well, welcome to Argentina, everybody. This presentation is really a kind of a combination of two different trips that I made down there. One was a trip with my wife, Kay, which we went from December, right about this time in December 2013 through February of 2014. So we were there for almost 3 months traveling around. And for that part of the trip, it'll be more like a travel log. And Buenos Aires, which is the largest city in the capital, is right about here. And that's where we started that trip. But the kernel that trip was designed around is my wife got invited to participate in a woman's trip to Antarctica with a really unique Australian friend of ours and another friend from Juneau. And they were to meet in Ushuaia, where the ship left, and Ushuaia is right down here, way in the southern tip of Argentina. So we decided to make a trip of it, and with the fact that we had to be in Ushuaia on a certain date, and I wanted to do some fishing, so we went for as long a time as we could. Now, our son had spent time in South America, and he was over here on Chiloé Island, banding birds, and he suggested that we bring some camping gear and travel by bus and then rent a car in one location or another for a week or so at a time and do some camping in the parks. And so that was kind of the scenario that we decided to follow. Argentina is a huge country. It's about 2,300 miles from north to south and about 800 miles across, maybe 850 or something like that. But it's a big country in landmass. It's about 1/3 the size of the continental part of the United States. The main geological feature, of course, are the Andes Mountains, which is a spine all the way down the border between Chile on the west and Argentina on the east. And that's on the western part of Argentina. The northern part up in this area is fairly tropical. Paraguay, Brazil, Uruguay border it. And then the kind of central plateau or plains area. It's heavily agricultural. The mountains are beautiful, spectacular Rocky Mountains in the far north. It's very dry. As you get farther south, you get more and more rainfall. Most of it falls on the Chilean side, but charges the rivers and lakes which flow out into the flatlands as they approach the Atlantic. And actually in the southern part of Argentina from about here on down is called Patagonia. It refers to the region of both Argentina and Chile down there. But on the Argentine side, most of the rivers do not make it to the Atlantic. They dry up before they get there. Some of them do. So it's an interesting way of thinking about rivers. But anyway, we started off in Buenos Aires. We then took a bus down to this area, spent some time here on the Peninsula Valdez, then went across to the mountains and the Esquel area, and stayed there for a week or so, and I got to do my first fishing of the trip. Then we took a bus down to Ushuaia with a stop in Rio Gallegos where we rented a car and did some traveling and camping around this area. So I'll begin the travelogue part and I'll just move through things fairly quickly. Buenos Aires is a beautiful city. This is one of the main squares. This was a unique art installation of a stainless steel poppy that would track the sun and open during the day and close up during the night. So our first place that we went to was the Peninsula Valdez. They had elephant seals there and Magellanic penguins. There are both in that photograph. Elephant seals are just like big slugs lying on the beach, and they're huge. They weigh like 4,000 pounds or something. And penguins were about 2.5 feet tall, or 2 feet tall, I guess. And they were pretty common. There are also guanacos and other animals. That's a camel relative of a llama that lives in Patagonia. Then from there we went over toward the Andes by bus, and this Los Alerces National Park. I got to do the first fishing of the trip there. Beautiful rivers. This is a river called Rivadavia, famous trout fishing stream. Beautiful area of lakes and streams. This is a place called Cholila. This is where Butch Cassidy ended up, and it's they've got a cabin there that they say they lived in, Butch Cassidy and his gang, when they moved to South America. This was a campsite in the park, and fly fishing only. Mosca is fly fishing, and this is the river that we camped on. Don't recall the name right now, but it was the first place that I fished, and I actually caught a small rainbow trout there. Then this is the Rio Caralifu, which is in the same area. We were headed up to a place called Cholila, in Lago Cholila. Beautiful campsite right at the outlet of the lake, the headwaters of that river. There were rainbow trout. It's one of the few places in Argentina where you can catch landlocked Atlantic salmon. And fishing was good. Again, fly fishing only, and you have to liberate the fish, which everyone was not doing, but you're supposed to. But a beautiful river. I spent a couple days just walking up and down fishing. With some success, I caught several rainbow trout. Nothing huge, but they were big enough to go after. This is an Atlantic salmon that I just released, small one. So there were a few of those around. From there, we took a bus to the south with a stop at the Cave of the Hands, which was, you can see the countryside is getting more Montana-like and drier. The valley bottom, though, was really quite lush in this particular valley, and it's rare there. And people, I'm sure, exploited that habitat when they lived there. But this Cave of the Hands, this is walking down toward it, was incredible place. And they put pigment in their mouth and put their hands out and spit the pigment around to make these silhouettes of hands. And there were thousands of these things in the caves and other writings as well, and other artwork. And this was, I think, in the order of 8,000 years old. From there, we headed down Route 40 toward Tierra del Fuego. And that's what the countryside looks like. We stopped in El Chalten, which is one of the places that Kevin's going to do some hiking. We did a little hiking around there. El Chalten is in the shadow of Mount Fitzroy, named after the captain of the Beagle, which was Charles Darwin's boat when he sailed around South America. The area around there, we spent some time at a park, Pietro Marino Glacier, which is a spectacular glacier. It had a big viewing area, but it was massive. This was, the front of that glacier is probably 100 feet tall, and it calves off. And the sign, if you read it, it says, "When ice falls, pieces are thrown violently dozens of meters away. This action caused the death of 32 persons that were behind the gates." So they say no trespassing. People paid attention to that sign. From there, we went to the town of Rio Gallegos on the Atlantic coast and rented a car, headed back up the river to camp at this place called Bella Vista, about halfway up the river, so I could do some fishing. This is a little stream. The Rio Gallegos is back in this valley here, moving in to the right. This is the Rio Gallegos Chico, and beautiful spring creek that had actually quite a good population of brown trout in it. I think I only caught one or two. They were fairly small, but very robust, very picky. You had to use small dry flies, and there was lots of algae and junk. It was tough fishing. That's nice little brown trout I caught there. And then we headed by bus down to Tierra del Fuego, end of the world. And it is. This is the town of Ushuaia. This is where the ship was leaving with my wife, our friend Thora, and the other two friends to head to Antarctica. Well, this is the Strait of Magellan, I think it is, right off of Ushuaia. Beautiful area. Start getting into beech trees, and they had these really interesting funguses growing on them, which are edible fungus, and that was one of the mainstays of the native people that lived there at the time, in the early years anyway. And then these things would dry out. I've got one at home. It's hard as a rock. So you have to get them when they're soft and mushy, I guess, to eat. They're very pretty interesting little things, about the size of a golf ball, the biggest ones. So from Ushuaia, I waved goodbye to my wife and our friends, and I rented a car, and it was my time to go fishing. So one thing that was also a focus of the trip, a friend of mine from England goes to a place called Lake Strobel almost every winter and fishes for a week or two. And he invited me to join him this year. And it turned out I was going to be down there anyway, so it worked out beautifully for me. So during the time that they were heading to Antarctica, I traveled around Tierra del Fuego. I rented a car for 6 days and just camped and fished around. This is Lake Fernando. It's the largest lake down there. The wind blows a lot. I ended up just catching a few fish here. There were a number of lakes and rivers that I did fish in. Nothing was spectacular. One that I was particularly interested in fishing because it's an anadromous brown trout river was, hold on a sec, Rio Irigoyen. There's a commercial operation down near the mouth, but I learned that there was a dirt road that you could get access to the upper end. And so I did go up there. I caught a couple small brown trout. This is a little place called Bombilla, which was a lagoon to the big lake. This is a gaucho. He came right over where we were fishing and posed for a great photograph. And he's a weathered old guy. The people are really horse people down there. Interesting culture. So this was the road out to the upper part of Lake Rio Irigoyen. This was the river. Quite a rickety old bridge, but it was passable. And I fished there just for most of one day. I caught 3 or 4 small, probably rearing anadromous brown trout. They were about 10 or 12 inches long. So they were cute little things, but it was I didn't find any of the big anadromous fish. This was a river called Iwansur, which is you drive right over this thing. I spent one whole day walking down toward the Atlantic Ocean on this, hoping to find an anadromous brown trout, which I failed to do, but I did again catch a couple of smaller fish. Beautiful river, pretty little brown trout that I caught. And these are guanacos, and they were pretty curious. They almost came right up to me. I didn't have much of a telephoto lens, so they were curious beasts. Another place where I camped and fished a little bit unsuccessfully here, but it was just such a neat area to explore on your own. Beautiful water. There are fish in all the waters, but they're not particularly abundant everywhere. This was a gentleman that I met on the bus. I turned my rental car in Ushuaia, took a bus to Rio Grande. And Rio Grande is the city on the Atlantic where near the mouth of the Rio Grande River, which is the famous anadromous brown trout stream. And there's a public area of the stream, and this is in the public area. He had a fly rod. I befriended him, and we ended up, he was a ship captain. I ended up staying in the same hotel, and we fished together a couple of days there and caught some small brown trout. Nothing gigantic. And from there, I took a bus up to El Calafate, which is a kind of a small touristy hub of a town, a little south of El Chalten. And it was really a pretty nice place. We enjoyed there when we passed through, and then I was back there again, met up with my friend Peter and our mutual friend Lou Hegedus from Colorado, and we got in the truck and drove for 5.5 hours to get to Lago Strobel. And this is the one in the magazines they refer to as Jurassic Lake. So Strobel, we were going to this place called Laguna Verde, Estancia Laguna Verde. The road got worse and worse and worse in those 5.5 hours. Finally, we got to the lodge. This lake here is Laguna Verde. It's the green lake. It's an interesting lake. There are flamingos there, which really surprised me in that far south. Lots of waterfowl, and there are brown trout, rainbow trout, and brook trout in the lake. Nothing huge, but we fished it one afternoon when we first got there. I went there again in 2015, and I'll get into that trip later. But when we fished that lake, when we got there in 2015, we caught fish up to about 7 pounds. So it was really pretty nice fishing. This is one of the owners of Laguna Verde Lodge. We spent a lot of time with him there, and then the following week, I spent a week fishing on Strobel with that group of folks, and then this gentleman, Luciano, Lou, and I drove north and spent a week up back around Cholula fishing. So this is a rainbow from Laguna Verde. This is not Strobel. And they take good care of you there. They've got beautiful Argentine wines and fantastic food. And it was a pretty nice place to stay. This is Strobel. You did in fact drive down there. Interesting, all these white rocks are all covered with calcium. The lake is very basic, and when the wind blows, which it almost always does, it splashes up on the lakes and evaporates on the rocks and evaporates. It leaves a deposit of calcium, and some places this calcium was like a foot thick on the rocks. It was pretty amazing. This is often what it looked like, windy. And it was nothing to have chop and be standing out there up to your knees, getting splashed over your waist, and 30 and 40 knot winds. And one day it was blowing 50, gusting to 70, and we decided not to fish. But you got used to it. But it's incredible. You're standing there in this moonscape, casting into the teeth of a 30-knot wind and barely getting your fly out 30 feet, and you catch fish like this. The place is incredible for the fish. And you didn't catch one every cast by any means. There were days when I only caught 1 or 2 fish. Other days when I caught more than 10. Say on average, you get 6 or 7 or 8 a day. This is my friend Peter. I got to know him in Nome when he came and fished with us up there, but he fishes all over the world, Peter Cockwell. But you get used to the wind. They cook beautiful meals for lunch down there too, so you feel well taken care of. Wine on the windblown beach of the lake. This is my friend Lou. He's a retired chemistry professor from Colorado State University, sampling the salad. Now there's one stream that enters into Lake Strobel, the Barrancoso River, and that's it. We were there in January. The water was low, middle of summer. Earlier in the year, the fish apparently move up there in October, and the water can be a couple of feet higher than that and really roaring down through there. But it was full of beautiful small rainbow trout, and occasionally a few hold over bigger fish too. So it was fun pocket water to fish these just spectacular little rainbows, and it's on dry flies, so it was really fun. Beautifully spotted fish. I think most of these would reside in the stream for a few years, maybe just a year. They grow like crazy there, then go out to the lake where they feast on scuds. The amphipod population in the lake is huge, and there were no fish in the lake. In 1994, the guy that owned the estancia there got some rainbows from the Santa Cruz River, which were basically California McCloud River stock, and put them in the Barrancoso River and forgot about them for a few years. And he came back and they were like this. And these are fish that I caught in the river, so they were really fun in small water. We are back on the lake, getting together. You either went down in a four-wheeler or in a truck to fish for the day, and you can move around. They tried to get you in places where you weren't casting right into the teeth of the wind, but you catch these just massive rainbow trout. Just this was probably the biggest one I caught the first year. I think it weighed 19 pounds or something ridiculous. It was a real hog. Fish being released, but you can see they're in pretty good condition. So there's another big, beautiful fish I caught. This one was about 18 and a half, I believe, or 17 and a half pounds. Nice fish. Well, after my stay at Strobel, we, with Luciano, we drove north up to Cholila. This is a place called Fronteria Lodge, and we stayed there. So we're pretty well taken care of there as well. And we floated several different rivers. This is, we floated the Curulufu again, one that I'd fished up by Lake Cholila, and then we floated the Chubut for 3 days. It was decent fishing, fairly small fish. After Strobel, everything seems small. Fairly good numbers. It was a fun trip and fun to see some different waters. When we were on Rivadavia, we rode up into this spring creek, beautiful little spring creek. Both Lou and I each caught a nice brown trout there. That's lunch, glass of wine and a nice sandwich. Yeah, even on the float trips, they take good care of you. They set the table, put the tablecloth out, pour wine. It's pretty nice. This is Luciano fishing. And without exception, all of his guides and all the people at the lodge are fantastic casters. You have to be, just in order to fish in that wind. So if you plan a trip there, practice your casting before you go. It's like going to the saltwater flats. You just need to deal with the wind because it's going to be there. Again, beautiful brown trout. This is on the Chubut. Lou landing a fish. And rainbows as well. This is a leg of lamb roasting over the fire. This is a little crayfish type critter that lives in a lot of the rivers in Patagonia. And the fish feed vigorously on them. And sometimes it feels like you've caught a lake trout full of snails. You know, you can feel the exoskeletons of these things in their stomachs. Well, then I left Lou and I took a bus up north and met up with my wife Kay, who's here, and our Australian friend, and we traveled together back to northern Argentina, and we went to the far north, up on the Brazilian border, to the Iguazu Falls, and it was incredible, natural wonder. It really is one of the wonders of the world. And we've seen some big waterfalls around the world, but this one was just in a class by itself. It's a fantastic place. So there are so many really interesting places in Argentina, and this is in the far north. It's in the tropics. We also went to a big marsh area called Ibera Marshlands and spent a few days mostly birding. I don't have, didn't include photos of that, but it's in this area in the Corrientes province. This is Iguazu province in the far north. Corrientes is a little farther south. But a fairly photogenic waterfalls. It's an incredible place. So my next trip down to Argentina was with Ross Novak from Fairbanks and Phil Berna from Anchorage. They both wanted to go to Strobel, and it didn't take much arm twisting to get me to go back down. So we wanted to fish for golden Dorado this time too. So we spent a week at Strobel, and then Luciano, the owner, was going to arrange some golden Dorado fishing for us. The plan was to go up near Salta in north central Argentina, where we could fish in jungle rivers and clear jungle rivers for big spawning fish and sight fish to them. Luciano had been there the year before with his father, and he said it was fantastic, but it turned out that everything was flooding up there while we were there, and we ended up, as you'll see, having to book into a different place on a large river. But Strobel was pretty much unchanged. This wind still blew every day. This is Ross for the typical Strobel fish. The fish probably average 9 pounds there. These are not just the biggest fish. These are what most of the fish look like. It's incredible. Occasionally you get smaller ones, but they're just magnificent beasts. That was a fairly calm day. This is Phil, he couldn't believe it. So we call this Ross's Rock. He liked it up there because he could look down and see fish cruising by once in a while. And you can see the crusty calcium on all the rocks here. And this is a fish that spawned earlier in the year and was back in the lake fattening up. They say they can put on 2 pounds a month in recovery after spawning, just eating scuds. It's incredible. So again, nice place to be, good people, well run, fantastic fishing, great food, good wine, lots of fun. So this is the place we ended up going. We flew back up north, and then were met by a friend of Luciano's, and we went to this place called Rancho Pelo Largo on the Parana River near a town called Esquina. This is about halfway up the Parana, north of Buenos Aires, about halfway up into the almost to Corrientes. This is a guy who came with us from Strobel. His name is Eric Argati. He guided at Strobel for a while now. He works for the Fly Shop in Redding, California, in their travel section, and he lines trips up for people. So he was collecting data to use in the future. This was more of a high volume place than we had anticipated. It was out in a boat every day, cruising around, 2 anglers through a boat with a operator and a guide. Really interesting, a great place for birding. Fishing was decent. Used big flies that move a lot of water, either on the surface or subsurface. A lot of stuff I tied with big deer hair heads that were made to go underwater and just create a commotion. And you fished structure, and the fish weren't giant. They were about, 3 to 10 pounds. Occasionally you get one maybe a little bit bigger. Most of the fish we caught had a lot of fin damage, and the fin damage you'll see on some of these fish was from small other fish just chewing on the fins while they're just sitting around here. The river's full of, I don't know how many species of fish. I bet there are probably 50 freshwater species there or something. It's like the Amazon. And this is what a lot of their fins look like, just from, it's a tough life, even for a predator. And they are a predator. They're built for eating other fish, and they're spectacular, beautiful fish. They are like fishing for largemouth bass. They hit hard, jump once or twice, and then they kind of come in fairly easily after that. And the piranhas, there are a couple different species of piranhas. I never did learn which was which, but that's about the size that they were. They often kept these to take home and eat, take home to their families. The guides would. They would destroy a fly. So you have a fly on for Dorado, you could fish with it all day if you only caught Dorado, but you get one of these things and they would just destroy it. They're pretty cool animals. And we'd often fish right till sunset and then blast off and head home. And the evenings after sundown, and all the aquatic insects were flying around, and June bugs and things. You'd be hit by bugs like you got hit by a golf ball. It was pretty interesting. But every morning we would kind of divide up and head out. It was kind of a different kind of fishing, but it was really fun and worth doing. 7 or an 8 weight rod would have been fine. An 8 weight is perfect for Strobel. So if you to do both, unless you're going, there's a big impoundment up on the Paraguay River, I think, or the Uruguay, one of those two, that has really big Dorado, and that you'd need a bigger rod for. But for anything in the Parana, unless you're going to the jungles to fish for big spawners, 7 or an 8 weight rod would be fine. But look, this guy hardly has a tail left. This is Ross landing a fish. You can see the big flies. And they weren't very fussy. Anything big and black that moved water, they liked red and black, green and black. Forgot what this little beast was called, but obviously a predator. Looks like a mini pike. And they would hit hard and they would jump once or twice. So they were fun fish to catch. This is one of the larger ones. Interesting water lilies. These lily pads, some of them were 4 feet across. They're huge. I think this is one of the bigger ones that I caught. And this guy was all scarred up. I don't know what he had been into. Dorado fishing in this area, it was hot. It was really like the flip side of the coin from being in Strobel, where the wind's howling and it might be below freezing at night. You're out there in the early morning and be 35 Fahrenheit, 40 knot winds, and you got every stitch of clothes you've got on here. You're just trying to cover up for the sun. It's like fishing in the tropics. This is a fish that they called sabalo, but it seemed like they called everything that was like a whitefish is sabalo. And this is what the big Dorado ate. And I think it's a plant eater. Funny little mouth on the end. The Ross are the decent fish. But they're beautiful. I've always wanted to touch one of those buggers. They're great fish. And these guys, they no mercy. You wanted to keep your fingers out of their mouths. And then our last day, we went downriver and Ross got out some conventional gear that they had on the boat and with some bait, caught this weird catfish. But some of the Brazilians that were with us were fishing with bait and bringing fish home, and they had butchered a bunch of these on the dock one morning that were about twice this size. They had a stingray there too, a freshwater stingray that would get to be about 5 feet across. Saw some pictures of huge ones. So when you're out wading, and we did some wading there in the muck, you know, you're shuffling your feet just like if you're on the flats. So then the following year, we went back to, no, I take that back. We'd already been to Strobel. We were up north fishing for Dorado, and we had a windsurfer app on one of the phones. I think Ross had it, or Luciano, and it was called windguru.com, and it would give you the wind forecast for every point on the planet into the future. And we're looking at it, and the forecast for the next week at Strobel, they had 3 days that were supposed to be flat calm. And Luciano, the owner of the lodge, he said, it's never like that. And so Russ changed his airline reservations and went back down for another week when it was going to be calm. And he was glad he did. This is what Strobel looked like when he was down there for 3 days. It wasn't that way the whole week. They had a drift boat up on the beach. They had never put it in the water. And when he was there, he convinced him to put it in the water, and they rode around and fished, and they could find pods of fish just sipping caddisflies off the surface, and they could sight cast to the big ones. And he caught some massive rainbows. He caught 3 that were over 20 pounds. So he gave me a few pictures. I'll just show you some of his big guys. I mean, there's the drift boat on a calm day. I've never seen Strobel like that in the 2 weeks that I've spent there, but you need to look for it. And these things you catch on scud patterns, they'll take anything. You had to fish it really slow. They're not used to chasing their prey around. Woolly buggers, leech patterns, and when it's fairly calm, they'll hit things on the surface. Any big foam hopper or anything close, beetles, floating beetles, caddisflies, anything. And even when it's windy, you can fish a scud under a strike indicator, or you can just throw it out on an intermediate tip or on a floating line and just let it sink a little bit, or basically a lightly weighted woolly bugger, and just move it really slow so you just have contact with it and you'll feel them take it. But massive rainbows, and that's the biggest one he caught. I don't know, it was like 24 pounds or 25 pounds, and just amazing. So that's the end of my presentation for you. I hope you've enjoyed that, and I'll try to answer any questions that you guys have. So Kevin, you may have to prompt me through how to answer questions here.
Yeah, we'll stop screen sharing so we can kind of see everybody. And yeah, if anybody has any questions, go ahead and shout them out or put them in the chat. I've got a couple for Fred, but I'll let you all have a crack at it first.
I would recommend that anybody who has the desire and really wants to get into some incredible rainbow trout fishing. I mean, it's got to be the best rainbow trout fishing on the planet. They're not native. If you want big native rainbow trout, the best fishing is in Kamchatka. And Alaska is probably second best for native rainbow trout. But for rainbow trout as a species, go to Strobel. There's no place like it on Earth.
All right, well, I'll jump in with the question while those guys are thinking. So fishing licenses while they're down there, do you get different ones in like different areas of Argentina? Or is there kind of a blanket one?
There is one for Patagonia.
Okay.
And that's the only place where I fished. When we went up for the Dorado fishing, we got a license through the lodge. Okay. For the week that we were there. So when I went down for 3 months, I bought a season Patagonia license, and it wasn't too much money. I think it was around $80 or so for a year.
And then did you eat any fish while you were there? You said they kept piranha sometimes, but did you get to sample any of that?
We ate Dorado. We ate fish at Strobel. We had rainbow trout a couple of times, and it was delicious. And I ate Dorado. I ate a fish called pacu, which they say is the best eating of all the fish in the Parana. And they were delicious. The first time I had it was at a restaurant in Iguazu, and it was overcooked. So it was not perfect. But then at another time, I had it once more, and it was really well done, well prepared, and it was delicious.
And those are the ones that they're related to piranhas, right? But they eat plants, like or seeds.
Yep, they eat fruit. They're built like a piranha, only they get to be up to 15, 20 pounds.
How do the trout fight at Lake Strobel? Are they like a steel where they're just taking off and going airborne, or are they more of a dogged
It's
lake trout?
a mixed bag. I mean, sometimes they would jump and really rip off line. Other times they just kind of that dogged pull hard, more like a char or a lake trout.
It looked like you would want to keep your line clear of all those rocks there. It almost looks like a marine shoreline where there's all that kind of crusty stuff that could abrade your line. I would imagine you want to try to keep the fish away from that.
Had to do that, and that's one reason why a sinking line is not needed or heavy flies, because that crusty stuff is a lot like coral, and it'll grab your fly and hang on to it.
And then I guess I'll open it back up to anybody here while I've been yammering away. Does anybody else have any questions for Fred?
Yeah, I have one. So Fred, it sounds like you did a fair mix of guided and DIY fishing. We were there, but your DIY fishing, you said you only caught some small fish for the most part. Do you think it's worth spending any time doing that, or would you just go straight for the guides?
I think it's worth it. And if I were to go down there again and have the time, I would probably spend a month just fishing on my own. And I would also go to Strobel again. And I would probably go down there and be fishing on my own and watching the weather, notify Luciano that I would like to book in at the last minute if there's any room, and try to cherry pick my weather and go to Strobel for a week of good weather. But if you, it's definitely worth fishing on your own. There were a lot of places I wanted to go to that I just didn't have time to. I mean, it was a family trip and we were doing other things. I basically had a week on my own, most of it with a car, so I could go around and fish, but I didn't get out. I was just exploring. There are a couple of books. This is a book that's been around for a while. I'm just going to look at the publishing date on it. Probably 1991. Okay. Argentine trout fishing, Fly Fisherman's Guide to Patagonia. This one's pretty decent, but the more recent book, this is like 2012, I think. Again, looking for the date, 2008. This is by Barrett, Madison, and Evan Jones. Fly Fishing in Patagonia, Trout Bum's Guide to Argentina. This is a really a great book. And if you had this book and a car and the better command you have of Spanish, the more access you're going to find. I had very little Spanish, and I suffered for it. But if you, I would recommend you take some Spanish lessons before you go down, and at least get so you can say, hi, how's the fishing? And, you know, I was able to establish a conversation with other fishermen. I mean, I'd start showing them flies, and we'd pretty soon be trading flies and things. People were really friendly and open, but it would be a whole different level if I could have spoken and understood Spanish. So I definitely, it's worth doing it on your own.
Somebody asked in the chat, is Spanish the dominant language, and what was the cost to fish Strobel?
When I was there, the cost for Strobel was 5,300, I think, for a week. And I assume it's a little more now. I haven't checked. That was 2014, so it's a few years ago now, almost 10 years. So I don't know what it is now.
And that's a place you have to, basically, you have to have a guide, or, because it's private land all around the lake, correct?
Yeah, you can't even get there. There's a gate, and it's not locked, but it's closed, and it's obviously the road is private. I guess that initially the roads weren't nearly as good going out there. Initially, meaning before Laguna Verde was a lodge, and there's another lodge at the mouth of the Barron Coast River that was started by the Loop Tackle Company in concert with the estancia owner. And I think that Laguna Verde owns that lodge now too, and they also have access to the other side of the lake. So they've got access to, I think, to essentially to all of Strobel in their control. So you can't get out there with at least some consent from them. And Luciano's a great guy, but they have also got a business to run. And but it's worth the expense. There's no place like it. There are other lagunas around, or lagos, lakes, and small lakes they call lagunas, that are stocked with fish around there. And sometimes if it's real windy on the big lake, you'll fish these smaller lakes, and you'll catch brown trout and rainbow trout that are up to 10 pounds in these tiny little lakes around. Some of those other ones, there may be access to. So much of it's private there, but that being said, if you can strike up a conversation and ask permission, a lot of times the estancia owners will let you go. I mean, they know there's fish there, but they don't have time for fish. I mean, they're herding sheep or cattle or something on their land, and that's what their business is. And there might be fish around, but that's for a day off once in a while. So I think it used to be much easier. I've talked to people who used to go down there 20 and 30 years ago and travel around and fish on their own. And they said every time you asked permission, even if you couldn't speak Spanish, they were happy to have you go fish. And if you brought them a fish at the end of the day, they were even happier. So I think you can still do that.
Did you catch any or many of the brook trout down there?
Just a couple, and only in that one Laguna Verde, and I caught two small ones in a river in Tierra del Fuego. One of the it was a small little creek that ran between a couple of the lakes. I don't even know what drainage I was in, but I had to walk for about 2 hours to get there.
That's cool. There's a fair bit of diversity of fish down there, like the Atlantic salmon.
Mm-hmm.
I want to eventually get the salmon Grand Slam through the IGFA, where you get all 5 species of Pacific salmon, and then an Atlantic salmon too. And that's the one I need. Is
Cherry salmon.
Yeah, they don't include that in that slam, but you're right. There's definitely other ones out there too. So. Anybody else got any questions for Fred?
All right. Well, I guess I'll sign off then. Thanks for all of those that came and watched, and good fishing to you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Fred. So the meeting's recorded too. We'll post that later if you missed part of it. And yeah, consider getting a Midnight Sun Flycasters membership too. And hopefully we'll see you next month for the meeting then. Really appreciate everybody tuning in. All right. Have a good night, everybody.
Bye.